So we've now gone through our CAM pages, code example. We've seen how functions were used there. We have also gone through timing and how we can use timing for creating games. We then went through the Tetris example fairly thoroughly. And now we'll just finish off by going through our last few topics of JSON, AJAX, and coding standards. So JSON is a lightweight data interchange format. It is easy for humans to read and write, and it is easy for machines to parse and generate. And that came straight from JSON.org. Now JSON.org, or JSON in general, is actually somewhat interesting. It was created and standardized by Doug Crockford, and he has basically become the standardization board for JSON. So he was able to develop it very quickly and to get it standardized very quickly. And he did this as an alternative to using XML that was much more lightweight. And because it is more lightweight, it does have slightly less functionality, but I think it is incredibly easy to use and has become very popular for that reason. JSON has name-value pairs. So we give a name, so in this case just title, and the value of that. So in this case, front cover full ad. We the name does need to be in quotes because JavaScript had a lot of reserved words. And these reserved words are like variable names or words that we can't use, or sorry, they are not variable names. They are like function names or words that cannot be used as variable names. And some of them are reserved words that aren't even being used for functionality. And so when Doug Crockford was creating JSON, instead of including a large appendix of what variable names could be used and what names couldn't be used, he was really passionate about keeping that documentation as light as possible so that as many people as possible would start using JSON. So instead of creating an appendix for explaining why reserved words can't be used, he just wrapped the title, the variable name, in quotes, which got around the issue in JavaScript. So the beauty of JSON is that it can be parsed and it will return an object. JSON can be passed to other languages. So for instance, we can pass it to PHP, and PHP has functions like JSON_decode and JSON_encode. And so if we pass a JSON file to a PHP file, that PHP file could parse the JSON and take our object data right out of JavaScript and understand it immediately inside of PHP's own data structures. Likewise, Ruby and Perl can also work with JSON, so JSON is a great way of passing data between languages and easily being able to convert it and understand it within the particular language that we're working in. So JavaScript has methods itself for turning objects and arrays into proper JSON and resurrecting them later. So we can use the two functions that JavaScript has. Is the first is stringify, where we can call JSON.stringify and pass it in an object, and that will return JSON that can be passed to PHP. If we have JSON and we want to turn it into a data structure, we can use JSON.parse to turn JSON into a JS data structure. So we saw this in the CanPages examples where I had objects that needed to be saved into cookies, and so to do that I used JSON.stringify, and I passed in my products object or my locations object or whatever it was, and I stringified that object, and that returned a string that I could then save inside my cookie. When I wanted to read from my cookie, I could get the string that was saved in the cookie, and I could run it through JSON.parse, and that would return back to me my full object that I could use and interact with easily. So this is kind of the beauty of JSON, is that it gives us a format that is really easy to parse for machines, and that has made it very popular. So this idea of turning a complicated object or data structure into a string is called serialization. And basically, what we use serialization for is when we want to pass complex data structures across a network connection, or if we want to write them to a binary file, it can be very difficult to write complex data structures into a file and be able to read those back into JavaScript, or to read them in PHP or any other language that we want to read them in. So when we serialize data, we turn it into a string or simple text, and that simple text is really easy to transmit across a network connection or to save to a binary file. So we can serialize it, but then we need to unserialize it. And so many languages, and JSON.parse is an example of unserializing it, but it takes a string and it interprets it and uses a syntax inside that string to build out the data structure. So JSON overall is just another alternative to XML, but it is a very good alternative, especially in relation to using JavaScript. So moving on to AJAX. AJAX has kind of taken over the web, and so we'll talk a bit about how AJAX works, but I won't get into too many examples of how to use AJAX, and instead we'll wait till we're dealing with jQuery and look at it then, since there are good libraries for dealing with AJAX rather than dealing with it directly with JavaScript. So AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript in XML. And instead of XML, you can also use JSON. Asynchronous means that it runs in the background, so it happens at the same time as you are browsing your website, and so the browser can connect to the server without the user needing to request a new page load from the client. Some of the challenges that I'm sure we're all aware of with AJAX is that it can be difficult to link to AJAX pages. So if we change the page based on or using AJAX, it can be difficult to link to that exact instance of that page. The second is that search engines don't execute AJAX when they're crawling your page. So if your content is only getting added through AJAX, then it won't necessarily get indexed. Now I have heard that Google is starting to actually execute pages as they are crawling them. I don't know how true that is or how much they are doing that, but this may be slowly starting to change. So with AJAX, we have the main object that we rely on for AJAX is the XML HTTP request object. And this request, XML, I'm just going to call it XHR for short, but this object has different methods and different properties that we can use to communicate with the server in the background. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to initialize the object. So var XML HTTP is equal to new XML HTTPR request, and that is a function. So that the XHR object has an open method, and so we could call this by going XML HTTP.open. And what we would want to do with this is we want to pass in a method, so it can be either get or it can be post. Get is faster than post, but post is more robust and secure, so we can do more with post, and post does not have size limitations if that is an issue. The next thing that we want to add to our open method is it has a URL argument. So let's say I want HTTP, www.google.ca. And the last thing we want to do is we want to pass in a true or false, and that is for whether this is asynchronous or not. And true means that it will run in the background, and for the most case, that is the case, that we will want this to be true. We have a send method, so once we've opened it, if this was our code, we would go XML HTTP.send. And that would take this open, and it would send it to the server, which in this case is this file from the URL. The next thing that we have is we have a response text property, and this gets the response from the server as a string. So if it's returning HTML, it would return that just in a long string that we could then parse. If we can also use a response XML property, which would get the response as XML data. So for instance, if I want to get the results from my AJAX request, I would go XML HTTP dot response text, and maybe I'll alert that. So this would alert the response from the server, whatever I got. So the next thing that we can do is we have the onReady state change property. And what we can do with this onReady state change property is we can tell it to execute a function. And that function will execute every time the ready state changes. And the ready state is a property that we'll get to in a second. So I could do something like XML HTTP dot onReady state change is equal to function and then do something with it. And so in here, I will know that my response text is ready. So if I want to do something with XML HTTP dot response text, I should have it. Oops, I don't know where my cursor went. I should do it inside my onReady state change function. So if I was to just do this right after, if I was trying to alert XML HTTP.response text right after my send call, it may not be ready yet. So doing it in this onReady state change function will make sure that this is set before we do that. Ready state property, so this is just a different states of moving through the AJAX call. And the last property that our XML request will have, or sorry, our AJAX request will have is the status. So if I go XML HTTP, I think is what my variable was, dot status, and let's say I alert this, that will either print out 200 or 404, and that is my response codes. I'm going to leave coding standards for now, and we can look at those at a later time.